Om Shanti, a greeting of peace to all my sisters and maybe some brothers who are also listening. And in 1937, after Brahma Baba had his vision of a better world, he understood that it was important to have equality in the world if you want to have justice and truth. And he then decided at that time, when the group got together, that the trust would be based with leadership by women as teachers and leaders. And so he initiated that training that started at that time in 1937. Until now, we found that it's been very, very effective to have women leaders for the same reasons that Brahma Baba had seen, to restore balance and equality, but also because women seem to have a natural gift for teaching and caring and sharing and working together. That's been the historical role of women in different ways. And so when in 1969, Brahma Baba passed away, the leadership was handed in a very practical way to two women. And they worked in a very collaborative style, not just collaborating with each other and sharing their gifts, their specialities to the role, but also involving the other sisters who had been with them since 1937. And so the leadership qualities that developed since then, those people, we used to call them the dadis. We only have one left now. She's 100 years old. But within that small group, then that small group has been able to teach and mentor and serve many other women, men also, but especially women. And so that style of leadership has continued. And what I find is that it's easier somehow for a woman to have humility. Now, I have wonderful brothers who are very, very humble instruments, but I think that it comes more naturally to women. But also, usually their unconditional love and care and support for each other and for others too make them ideal leaders. Within a spiritual organization, it was quite a revolution to have women become teachers and leaders, but this was the vision, and Brahma Baba wanted to fulfill it in the best way possible. And of course, he also understood that if you want a better world, there has to be a spiritual dimension that has to come in right at the heart of everything. And so I think that when women recognize their own spiritual identity and allow that to emerge and flourish, then I think whether the world offers them a position or it doesn't, they themselves will be, through their own capability, will be able to hold positions of leadership. Because one is where the world recognizes and acknowledges that, yes, this should happen. And in theory, most of the world does. But in reality, it hasn't happened yet. But I think women can change this by themselves creating that spiritual consciousness that allows them to be able to maintain an inner dignity, but also use their own qualities in the best way possible. It's not just men who feel that they have the qualifications to be leaders, but it's women who also support them very often. And so if you speak to women and ask them about women's leadership, they'll pause slightly and then say, well, maybe. It won't come instantly from the heart. Oh, yes, this is how it should be. I'm talking about some women, of course, not all, and some men too. And what I found is that men who have achieved greatness themselves are very willing to allow women to step ahead and be in the front. Where a man is himself struggling with issues of identity and self-esteem, it becomes a very competition thing. And so that competitiveness comes in, and a woman has to work harder than a man to get to the position that she's striving to achieve. And it means that a woman in a position of leadership generally would have worked maybe twice as hard as a man to get there. But also, I found that certainly within a spiritual organization, it's much easier because Brahma Baba set the pattern. And so that trend has continued. And especially when it comes to spiritual decisions, the men will always look towards the women to do that. And sometimes when it comes to administrative functions, they will still sometimes feel that, well, they know better, they have more experience. But I think that that actually is something that one can deal with as you work with patience and gentleness through the whole system. The foundation of a spiritual life, and therefore a spiritual leader, has to be their own methodology and time given to the self, that inner attention to the work that's needed to go on. Firstly, to stay in the highest consciousness as much as possible. Secondly, to allow the goodness that lies within to flourish and be emerging and expressed at all times. And of course, through the spiritual training that I was exposed to with Brahma Baba and Dadi Janki, those things were deeply ground within me. And so, yes, there have been more challenges than support, I would say, probably. But firstly, I make sure that I don't take things personally. I maintain that inner state in which I know, and for a spiritual leader, of course, you also know that you're not just an instrument for a task, but it's God's work, and God is going to get his work done. And so that awareness of being an instrument of the divine also is very, very powerful and helps me keep my own inner stage of dignity. And yes, sometimes when it gets shaken, then I have to remind myself of who I am and what the task is and how the task can only be achieved through the divine power, the spiritual power that you take from the one above. And so that has helped me hugely. I don't think I would have been able to manage without that spiritual capacity increasing all the time. A woman leader with good friends and mentors is a special asset. But I think that more than that, it's also the foundation of spirituality. So I would suggest to a young person aspiring to be a leader or women who are in leadership roles, it's so important to make time for the self, to be able to go on that inner journey so that I am making sure that my own inner battery is recharged on a continual basis. Otherwise, you're having to give in many, many different ways in whatever role it is you play. But women are expected to run a home, take care of the children more so than the father, and yet still manage a full-time job. So there are definitely higher expectations of women than there are of men. That's still today a reality. I would say probably maybe 75, 80% of families. And so for a woman to actually find the way inwards and be able to recharge the inner battery is the primary factor, absolutely vital. You cannot survive without that. Otherwise, you're giving and you find yourself empty and you come to a state of burnout, which isn't useful at all. And so firstly, to make time for the self, for silence and for some spiritual study, so that right from the beginning of the day, the best is, of course, early morning for all this, but right from the start of the day, your compass is put right, you're moving towards true north, because the things that you have studied of a spiritual context, whatever tradition you belong to or no tradition, but there are always beautiful things that you can read that can nourish the soul and also make sure that you're focusing on the inner core values. And so definitely to make time for the self on both these scores, the silence, but also the spiritual study is vital. And then, yes, secondly, If I can have a good mentor, a good friend, that's absolutely invaluable. But also generally, to surround yourself with people who are more positive rather than negative. It's a world of huge negativity, but I must make sure that I don't get influenced by the darkness. I'm able to keep the light inside shining brightly. And so a few good friends who are positive is always helpful.